Hi everyone, thanks for having me here today. Today I'm going to present some work that I've done over almost the last decade at the Auckland Botanic Gardens. So my current role is a botanist for Auckland Council, where I am managing all threatened species across the region in the wild. So that's a pretty big project. So my experience has come from managing these collections ex situ and looking to link those really closely together in the future. So the purpose of Auckland Botanic Gardens really is to connect people with plants and gardens. Their byline is where ideas grow, and they hope that visitors, when they visit the garden, take away just one piece of information. That might be a plant name, it might be an idea for gardening at home. It could be anything, but really what underpins those collections in the gardens is research, education and conservation. And with myrtle rust being imminent at the time in 2014 when I started, we really were looking at what are we going to do to be prepared when myrtle rust arrives. There wasn't really any action on the ground. And so the first thing we did was set up a sentinel survey. Now, a sentinel survey is one way of monitoring or potentially detecting an incursion. And we set this up across the gardens. It was a network of plants of both native and exotic species in kind of a grid format across gardens. Of course, as luck would be, none of our sentinel plants were the first to get myrtle rust. So myrtle rust arrived kind of smack bang in the centre of the gardens on the most susceptible species we had in the collection was a Lophomertus hybrid. We've been collecting data on this sentinel network for almost 10 years, so next year will be kind of a review period where we'll look at that data and be able to present it. But what we had done to date has been published in the Australasian Plant Conservation Journal. It's kind of a key transition from the sentinel survey was when myrtle rust became far more widespread in the country. We started to think, actually, we don't need to just detect it anymore. Now we need to monitor our most threatened species. So most of the plants that you see on this map aren't on the survey anymore. We've kind of prioritised those highly threatened native species. One of our other important roles in conservation is supporting community and mana whenua to increase their capacity to deliver plant conservation goals. And I'm very honoured to be here today along with Ngāti Kuri, who we've been working really closely with. Ngāti Kuri have a great program, an ambitious goal to return 2,000 plants of their very important taonga and ratamuihau to the wild. This is Metrosideros bartlettii. There are less than 12 left in the wild. They occur in the very far north of Aotearoa. And we have been very fortunate to work with this iwi, cultivating and caring for this taonga at Botanic Gardens. We have 5 genotypes of these plants in collections, and we've been able to have Thomas, who's here today, work at the gardens as a bit of an intern for a few weeks, learning more about these plants, how to propagate them, how to hand pollinate, because of course they were already threatened by plenty of other things, and producing viable seeds was one of them. So Thomas has been able to take that work back to his whānau and implement that up in the natural range of these species. Taking on a project like this is really challenging, though. It really counteracted some of our ethos around sustainable horticulture. Taking on a highly susceptible collection that required fungiciding to protect them was something we had never done before. We never used pesticides, insecticides or fungicides in our nursery, and so that kind of commitment for the long term, potentially not knowing when we might stop this, was really hugely concerning. I've been really enlightened in the last few days and see a lot of hope in the potential tools that we might be able to move towards to in the future. Obviously, COVID threw a real spanner in the works. We're in a nursery where hand watering and above head watering is really quite common, and so when you can't go to work and you can't water highly threatened plants, that is really, really stressful. So we had to implement some really important protocols, and we wrote these in, again, the Australasian Plant Conservation Journal if you're interested in reading more. We've also been a key player in facilitating research. When you've only got a team of 0.5 doing research, collaborating is key. One of the things we wanted to do was establish a seed orchard for Lophomertus, Ramarama and Ruhutu, which you've heard a lot about over the last few days. But one of the challenges is when you live in Auckland and you're in the ideal conditions for myrtle rust, potentially you're not the best place to have a seed orchard, and that's what we quickly found out. growing these plants in our nursery almost immediately got myrtle rust, and that was a threat to some of the other important things like the rata moihau in our nursery, and we had to make a decision on whether we would continue growing these plants or whether that risk was too great to some of our other important projects. So we decided those plants had to go, but the good thing was we partnered with so many other organisations. We worked really closely with Plant and Food Research. Those plants went to Rob Beresford, who did a field susceptibility trial on some of these Lophomertis, and you can read more about that report in that reference. Another thing in our nursery is that we grow 65,000 plants a year for revegetation, and most of our revegetation plants in New Zealand are traditionally Myrtaceae, so Manuka and Kanuka, so our Kunzea and Leptospermum. And having these in a nursery, which is the best conditions for myrtle rust at times, is a real risk, particularly to those rata moihau and other threatened species in our nursery. So we became leaders in a pilot within New Zealand with the NZPPI, which is our New Zealand Plant Producers Incorporated, and they decided to develop this program called Plant Pass, which is a nursery hygiene biosecurity system, a bit similar to your Australian farm management system that we were originally a part of. And we have really mentored a number of nurseries within our organisation and community nurseries out within Auckland to upskill and improve the practices within the nursery industry to ensure that they're really minimising the risk of their business to the spread of myrtle rust, but also to better contribute to the ongoing plant conservation. So if you're interested in a nursery perspective, we did document our journey through this article that was in the Salbaldia Journal. And one thing I haven't heard too much about, but we certainly discuss in our regular myrtle rust forums in New Zealand, is the ability to communicate and engage with communities, other stakeholders, partners, Indigenous communities. And the Botanic Gardens is a great place to do that. We have over 1 million visitors a year. We've got a captive audience, so why aren't we using those more? We partnered with B3, which is Better Borders Biosecurity, and researchers at Plant and Food Research to develop a biosecurity trail, which takes our visitors around the gardens, looking at different biosecurity threats to our country. Of course, myrtle rust was on one of those signs. Different layers of information are provided through interpretive signage, QR codes, a trail leaflet, and This has been a really great tool to connect with the public, but it's also been a tool for communicating with students and universities. We've seen lots of groups come through, either self-guiding through the trail or using our expertise to take them around and use us as a talking point. We've provided lots of training as well, and one of the first things that the response to myrtle rust in New Zealand was to look at seed collection, and Rowan highlighted what efforts we have made in that respect. So Auckland Botanic Gardens was really the leader in upskilling and doing that original seed collection training for many, many groups. We also hosted some iwi groups with funding through the Millennium Seed Bank Q to run these types of trainings. We've also trained high school students in plant identification and myrtle rust identification, helping to get the knowledge out there about what they're looking for. So finally, I just wanted to acknowledge Ngāti Kuri for kindly having me here today, and the New Zealand Biological Heritage and the Australasian Plant Pathology Society for very kindly funding my attendance. Thank you.
Thank you. Great talk. I'm interested in the early Sentinel program and what kinds of information you were collecting in that program, and having then had an incursion, which factors that you were monitoring were the most useful?
Yeah, because it was so early on, we really had quite basic data capture. We're really looking at presence and absence, and we probably monitored for 3 years before we made a detection. So once we made a detection, we started to monitor the actual impact of the myrtle rust, looking at dieback and the kind of spread amongst the canopy, but also recording some really useful data in terms of phenology and growth, which I know Rob mentioned yesterday, potentially entering some of that flush data into those climatic modellings to get us a better idea of what's going on. So hopefully by the end of next year, we'll have far more data to kind of collate and see what kind of meaningful information we've got out of it.
Do we have any other questions?
Kia ora. Nice talk, Emma. How important has that relationship with Ngāti Kuri been for you and the Botanic Gardens and the work that you're doing with iwi?
I think it's been hugely instrumental in what we do, and I think we've formed a really solid relationship in around Rata Moehau, but what I hope is also our ability to support other mahi that Ngāti Kuri would like support in. It's been a fantastic partnership, and I really hope to see more of that work across the country.